Let's talk about Frank Sinatra and his time at the CalNeva Lodge. Elmer Bones, his name was Elmer, they called him Bones Reener. He was an old-fashioned gangster in Chicago, a gambler, really, just a big gambler. He ended up with ownership of the CalNeva Lodge and Casino on Crystal Bay on the Nevada side of Lake Tahoe. It's one of the oldest, it might be the oldest casino in the state. Anyway, he owes the IRS 800 grand in back taxes. He can't pay it. So on ownership, the CalNeva passes to a restaurateur under odd circumstances named Bert Wingy Gruber. But then Gruber finds out he's got back taxes to pay because now he owns it. He puts the place up for sale. On July 13th, 1960, John Kennedy wins the Democratic National Convention at the nomination in L.A. In the paper on the same day, towards the bottom, it's an announcement that Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Hank Sinacola, who was a Sinatra pal, but he also ran a gossip rag for a pretty awful gossip rag for Sinatra. And a guy named Skinny DiMatto, who was a convicted white slaver out of New Jersey, who ran around during the Kennedy election in West Virginia in 1960, doling out money to the sheriffs and the ministers and so forth, that these guys have applied for permission from the state to take over the lodge. Well, what doesn't make the papers is that Sam Giancana is a secret owner. He has a percentage of the CalNeva, and that it was his influence, Giancana's influence on Wingy Gruber, that makes Gruber decide to sell the place for the remarkable fee of $250,000. What also didn't make the papers was the FBI was then working on the assumption that the real owner was Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, a dope dealer out of New York, and that Sinatra was just really nothing more than a frontman for all of these guys. The thing is, the casino had always has a history of losing money. It's been closed for, oh gosh, decades, and some guys trying to reopen it, but it just has a money-losing history. So why would Giancana be interested in this? Because Sinatra probably wanted to get in on it. He came to Giancana. Giancana wants to stay close to Sinatra, gives him the cash maybe to open up the place. And so why does Giancana want to stay close to Sinatra? Because Sinatra's in with the president, John F. Kennedy. Before the deal signed, though, Dean Martin looks around. He doesn't like it. He pulls out of the deal. But bear in mind, Dean Martin was in a partnership with, of all people, Raymond Patriarca out of Rhode Island. So they owned a racetrack in, pretty sure it was Massachusetts together. So Sinatra's convinced that the CalNeva, which is a very seasonal place, it closes end of October, can just be turned around if they dump enough money into this thing. It could turn a profit, and what he's selling is the mob bosses have been stealing the place blind, and with the right money they could make it a year-round international operation. He gives it a helipad and so forth. To put it on the map, on opening night, he invites Marilyn Monroe, Joe Kennedy, and Joe Kennedy's son, President John F. Kennedy, and Johnny Roselli, the hood out of who worked for Chicago, who was in California, and Sam Giancana. Uninvited, hiding up in the hills with their cameras, is the FBI. The FBI had rented a cabin, a lodge on the hotel property. So the agents, what they couldn't see is, now this is what Sam Giancana reportedly told his brother, who put out a book on it. I don't believe a word of it. I mean, that's my personal opinion. I don't believe anything that's in that guy's book, Giancana's book. I don't, I mean, it's all just too sensational. And my understanding is from people who knew Sam Giancana that he and his brother were never really close. But, so with that said, that the men, Sam Giancana told his brother, had sex with prostitutes. Now, he's including President Kennedy in on this, and Bobby Kennedy, and had sex with prostitutes, sometimes two or more, at a time in bathtubs, hallways, closets, on floors, almost everywhere but the bed. All this comes out after all these people, including Giancana, are long dead and gone. So it's not that they were so chaste they wouldn't do that, but anyway. So in 1961, there's this guy, Crackers Mendino. He was Medina had been in the mob since Johnny Torrio in Chicago, and he'd done everything. And he was big in pinball machines, jukeboxes, which most people don't realize. The mob had a lock on that business. So he was big in that, and he dies. Tony Arcota, the ultimate big boss rather, is one of the pallbearers. So all the mob guys are there. It's a big gathering. And they decide that afterwards, after the funeral, they'll go to the funeral parlor, have something to eat, and they'll have a meeting. So they tell Johnny Roselli at the meeting, go over to Nevada, keep an eye on Sinatra. And because in this, I believe Sinatra, Giancana did say this, so Sinatra was just too enamored with the Kennedys, and he was, quote, just not thinking straight anymore. I believe that. So Roselli had known a guy named Louis McWillie. They'd met back in 1938. Roselli had also done a stint as Chicago's rep at the San Souci Casino in Havana, and McWillie had worked in Havana for years and years for Meyer Lansky. It was never clear to anyone what he did for Lansky. When the Warren Commission asked him, what'd you do? He said, well, I was a key man at the Tropicana. But what does that tell you? So when Castro boots Lansky out, he takes McWillie with him, puts him inside his casino, the Tropicana in Vegas. Otherwise, people don't know much about McWillie, his background, anything else. He travels with a bodyguard. He travels by chauffeured limousine. Pretty impressive. He was under FBI surveillance his entire adult life. There's a big record on him. So anyway, Roselli tells McWillie, look, you're going to go to work for the CalNeva and watch over our investment and report back to me on anything you see regarding Sinatra, the Kennedys, and so forth. It's a step down for somebody like McWillie, but anyway, he took the job. At about the same time, McWillie is in fairly constant contact with Jack Ruby, the guy who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, who killed the president. One of the last people Ruby spoke to before he leaped onto history's page was McWillie. It's an odd relationship. I don't understand what these two saw in each other. McWillie told the Warren Commission they'd been friends since they were kids. He once sponsored Ruby down to Cuba for an 8-day vacation in 1959. That was the same year, by the way, that the Dallas police figured that Ruby was part of, Ruby and McWillie were part of the gambling rink in Dallas. They were just two different people. I mean, Ruby's a lout, to say the least. He was a very nervous guy, walked back and forth, talked constantly. McWillie's gray hair, very stylish guy. He really impresses Ruby. Ruby wants to be like him. Ruby calls him a very high-class type person, like a banker or a man who understood and enjoyed the finer things in life, which we all are given. However, after Ruby gunned down Oswald, the FBI had him draw up a list entitled People Who May Dislike Me. McWillie's on the top of the list, so odd. There's one more odd thing about this. November 1963, it's a Sunday, early November, early 70. Ruby travels up to Las Vegas. He goes into the mobbed up Stardust. He wants to cash a personal check. They won't do it. He invokes McWillie's name. He then meets with McWillie for 2 days, off and on. And then Ruby goes back to Dallas, and he's got flush with cash. And he pays off his back taxes to the city of Dallas and to the state of California, Texas. Anyway, Sinatra's party at the party he envisioned, anyway, the CalNeva, it kind of went sour quickly. In the summer of 1962, the very drunk Chucky English, who was a right-hand man for Giancana, he staggers out of the Armory Lounge, which is still there, by the way. The Armory Lounge was Giancana's headquarters, one of his headquarters. It's still there. It's a restaurant. You can go in. It's across from the airport, from the Air National Guard airport. English is drunk. He bumps into one of the FBI agencies. You guys are following us all over the place. You want to know something? You tell Bobby Kennedy, your boss, that if he wants to know anything about Momo, Sam Giancana, all he has to do is ask Sinatra. Well, That didn't go over well. The agent reports it back to Hoover. Hoover runs to Bobby Kennedy and said, this is what they said. Bobby Kennedy's pissed. He's double the amount of agents he got on everybody, including Sinatra and the CalNeva. What Bobby Kennedy may not have known was that the feds are already investigating the place. Skinny Diamato, the guy I told you from New Jersey, the white slaver, they think is running a statewide prostitution ring out of the place. That the girls are being flown in from San Francisco, and they're running this thing from the front desk of the CalNeva. Wow. A few days after the Chucky English thing, some employee, it's not really clear what all it was about, some employee shot dead on the front steps of the lodge. Not good, not especially for the hotel business. So in June 30, 1962, there was this, I researched him, a deputy sheriff named Richard Eugene Anderson, highly decorated guy. He came to pick up his wife, Mildred. She worked as a waitress at the lodge. She had complained about Sinatra being rude to her, saying things to her. Anderson had overheard some of the remarks, and he told, watch yourself. And so Sinatra said, of course, I don't know what I was thinking. But Sinatra's one of those guys who brooded over it. He let it build up. And the next night, Anderson comes into the kitchen to pick up his wife, and he's talking to some guy in the kitchen. Sinatra comes in, and he screams, "What the fuck are you doing in my casino?" One thing leads to another. Sinatra, who's tall, but he's not made of much, he grabs the deputy, who's a big guy, and he tries to physically throw him out. There's a wrestling match. Finally, Anderson says, screw this, and he punches Sinatra in the mouth hard enough so he can't perform on stage for a week. So several days later, July 17th, 1962, Anderson and his wife, they're driving down Highway 28, not far from the CalNeva, when they're driven off the road by a late model maroon convertible, California plates, at high speeds. Anderson lost control. He smashed into a tree. He's killed immediately. His wife was banged up pretty badly. Anderson's parents said, we still to this day think that Sinatra had something to do with our son's death. They had 4 kids, the couple. Sinatra's troubles weren't over yet. A few days after the Anderson thing, Marilyn Monroe, he tells Marilyn Monroe, come on out to the CalNeva. I want to discuss this film. We're going to do What a Way to Go. Monroe doesn't want to go, but then somebody says, well, Bobby Kennedy is probably going to be there. And she had read that Kennedy was in L.A. So she jumps on a helicopter with Peter Lawford, who was John F. Kennedy's brother-in-law, and they go out there. Exactly what happened at the CalNeva that night, if in fact anything at all happened, it just isn't known for sure. McWillie, uncharacteristically, he said about that night, there was more to what happened up there than anybody has ever told. It would be a big fall for Bobby Kennedy if it got out. All right. Anyway, there's dinner. Sam Giancana's there, Peter Lawford, Sinatra, Monroe. Giancana's not supposed to be at the casino, any casino. He's in the black book. He's at the top of the list. He's forbidden to enter into casinos. They don't even want him in the state. And he was there. San Francisco columnist Herb Cain saw him. He said, I saw Sinatra at the CalNeva when Sam Giancana was there. In fact, I met Giancana through Frank. He was a typical hood. He didn't say much. He wore a hat at the lake. He sat in a little bungalow receiving people. So during the dinner, Monroe, according to a source that nobody can nail down, gets uncontrollably drunk, and they lead her to a camera, and in the place of her room, the cottage, there's male and female prostitutes in there, and they all have a go at her, and Sinatra's taking pictures of this. He takes the film over to a guy named Hollywood photographer Billy Woodfield, and he gives him the roll of film, and he says, develop this. The next day, Peter Lawford goes to Monroe. He says, look, Bobby Kennedy is in L.A. He doesn't want to see you, hear you, anything. Just stay away from him. It's over. She starts to kick up a storm. She's going to go to the press and tell people. According to this story, They show her the photographs they had taken the night before of her with the prostitutes. That afternoon, it is a fact, she did try to commit suicide that afternoon, overdosed of sleeping pills. She had to have her stomach pumped. A year later, Sinatra's involvement with the CalNeva just comes to an end. The McGuire sisters are scheduled to perform. The McGuire sisters were a singing act. They were big in the 50s, early 50s. They're there because Giancana is dating Phyllis McGuire, and they were sharing a chalet together. Unfortunately for them, the FBI is photographing the whole thing, and they've got Sinatra out on a golf course with Giancana, getting in some golf. What they couldn't see that night, there's a party at McGuire's room, Giancana and McGuire's room. Victor LaCroix Collins, he was their road manager, the girls' road manager. Something happens. Everybody's drunk. There's a fist fight between him and Giancana, and Sinatra has to jump in. Anyway, the FBI gets an idea of what happened, and they write up this report, and they run probably over to the state of Nevada Gambling Control Board, and they give it to the chairman, Ed Olson. Olson calls Sinatra, who's at the Sands, which he owned a piece of it anyway, in Vegas, and he says, look, we hear Sam Giancana's on the property. And Sinatra said, no, absolutely not. There was a guy there who looked like him, and I waved to him by accident. I thought it was Sam. It's not him. So then the FBI gets a complete breakdown from Collins, the guy who was in the fight, on what happened that night. They go back to Olson. This is what happened. Here's a report on the fight. Olson calls Sinatra, says, listen, I hear there was a fight, Sinatra and Giancana and blah, blah. Sinatra says, I'm not going to talk about this. He slams down the phone on him, right? So now he's getting special treatment. Sinatra's getting special treatment. Olson calls him back and says, look, we need to probably resolve this. What can we do? Why don't you, Sinatra says, well, come on up to the CalNeva. You have free room. I'll give you some dinner. Olson says, I can't do that. It's inappropriate. But especially since he's under investigation. And Olson says he kept insisting, and I kept refusing. The more I refused, the madder he got, until he was almost hysterical. He used the foulest language I have ever heard in my life. To calm Sinatra down, Olson agreed to meet Sinatra in Olson's office, but Sinatra didn't show up. An hour later, Sinatra calls Olson in a rage. You listen to me, he says. You're acting like a fucking cop. I just want to talk to you off the record. Olson says, look, you can't talk to me that way. And Sinatra goes crazy on him. Later, the next day, they're going through the count at the CalNeva, and two of Olson's agents show up to watch the count. It was part of their job. Sinatra tells Skinny D'Amato, and these are the quote, throw the dirty sons of bitches out of this house. Well, D'Amato, who should have known better, he offers the agents $100 each just to leave. So they report the bribe back to Olson, and Olson now is going to revoke. He's had enough. He's going to revoke Frank Sinatra's license. And there were a lot of people who agreed with him. He should have done that. They weren't all. It ended up that Sinatra lost 50% of the CalNeva, 9% of his interest in the Sands in 1963. Joe Shimon, who was a nice man, he was a Washington, D.C. policeman. He was a PR guy, but he was also the department's liaison to the Central Intelligence Agency. He said, I talked to Sam the next day, Sam Giancana the next day. He told me that Sinatra had cost him over $465,000 on the CalNeva. Sam says that bastard in his big mouth, all he had to do was keep quiet. Let the attorneys handle it. Apologize. You get 60, maybe 90 days suspension. But no. Frank has to get on the phone with that damn big mouth of his, and now we've lost the whole goddamn place. Shimon said he never forgave him for that. And anyway, Nevada's governor, Grant Sawyer, completely backs up the gambling board. John Kennedy goes out there for, I don't know, some political thing. He's in a caravan with the governor. They're riding through the streets of Las Vegas. And Kennedy turns to the governor and he says, aren't you people being a little hard on Frankie boy out here? So the governor pretends he didn't hear the remark, but he repeats it to Olson. And Olson says, this is ridiculous. And that causes another sting. But after that, For the Kennedys, as Peter Lawford said, that was the end of old Frankie Boy as far as the Kennedy family was concerned.